My goodness. What? Curiosity.
Mute my. All right. Is to do that. Yeah.
It's gonna be right there. All right, can y'all hear us online? Okay. I need someone to unmute and say, we hear you. That's so great.
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, thanks, Amy. All right. Sorry about that. All right, everybody. Let's get to plants. Thank you all for being here tonight. Welcome to our September chapter meeting. I don't know about you, but I'm a little flabbergasted that it's September. But I'm ready for spooky season and ready for some native plant sales. So that's my big reminder to record this meeting, and we're being recorded, so that's good. So you know the deal, same thing, different day. We have some chapter business for you, and then we have our feature speaker, one in person, one online. I hope we can handle it. So let's get to it. We're always recruiting volunteers. Still looking for some help with our board. We have a new recruit, so Jimmy, woo! Thanks, Jimmy, for volunteering. Yay! Our board is largely unelected, so you're welcome to come join anytime. There's no democracy here. Yeah, thanks. Jimmy will help shape what we're doing. And if this is something you're interested in, helping plan our activities, helping decide what we're doing with our chapter membership funds, talk to us and we'll love to tell you more about what we do. You can talk to any board member, even Jimmy. Give him the easy questions. Biggest need right now is still our communications committee. I don't know about y'all, but our newsletter that Catherine's in charge of is just wonderful. I don't know if you saw the most recent one where it just had so many things going on in our area. That takes a lot of work, and we need more help with that. So if that's something you're skilled at, so this sort of includes organizing community events. So if you're on a lot of listservs and newsletters already, one thing you can do is anyone can help, is you can forward events that you think should be included in our newsletter to Grand Strand Publicity. That's a great way to get them included in our newsletter. Our other big need is social media. Yeah, we'd love to make our Facebook a little more active because a lot of folks use that to know what's up. So if that's something, if you're a big Facebooker and you want to help us write sort of engaging educational content for our members, let us know. And then plant sale. We might need some more hands on deck on our plant sale October 12th. If that's something you'd like to help with, you can talk to Tierney. All right. This could be you. In fact, we want this to be you. Sorry, Babs. We have flyers for our plant sale, and we need your help distributing them throughout the town. So we have a couple printed tonight. If you don't have access to a printer, if you don't have a cushy office job that you can, print things off of, You can borrow some of ours, or if you have a printer at home and you'd like to donate to the cause, please print these off and post them wherever you can. Babs, I heard you were talking about some good places to post them earlier. Sorry, put you on the spot.
Art galleries, cafes, the back of women's bathroom stall doors.
Yeah. Yep, anywhere you go and you see a bulletin board, stick one in there. That'd be really helpful for us. And if you see one out in the wild, let us know. That means, oh, a member beat you to it, so that's great. And then it's that time of year where we tell you to stop recycling. We want you to quit recycling your large cardboard boxes that could be used to carry plants home from the plant sale. So if you're a big online shopper, you get a lot of Chewy orders, save those nice big boxes, and bring them to the plant sale on October 12th. So what does the Grand Strand chapter want you to do? Stop recycling. All right, and then I went a little crazy with the clip art. Our next meeting in November will be our member presentations. And for those of you who were present last year for our member presentations, it was one of our favorite meetings of the year. So these presentations don't have to be professional. They don't have to have a PowerPoint. They should be loosely about plants, preferably native. I think actually we're gonna be pretty strict on that. It's gotta be native plants. So last year, some of the topics were winter sowing. Maeve made beautyberry jelly. We talked about plant books. We talked about a native garden that Jason made at Brook Green. And then we talked about a Carolina Bay with Sudi. I might be missing one, but those are some of the great topics. And to top it all off, we had a potluck. So we'd like to do that again this year. If you have any questions about these presentations or you're nervous, you want to workshop it with us, let us know. We're happy to help. We want to hear what you're passionate about, and we want to learn from y'all. So you'll see how to sign up in the next newsletter, and you can talk to us if you have any questions. And I think this is my final reminder. So the larger, our big Native Plant Society, South Carolina Native Plant Society, hosts a symposium or annual meeting every year. This year, it'll be in the Upstate chapter as the host for it. And it will be Friday and Saturday, October 18th and 19th at Table Rock State Park. So if you'd like to have a nice excuse to get away for the weekends and do some great native plant activities and meet other members from across the state, please sign up. Registration closes at the end of the month, and you should be able to find this information online. So scnps.org. I think it's now on the home page, but you could also check the news section. And I think it was in our newsletter. Yeah. Any questions about the symposium? Tierney will be there. We might have some other folks sign up too. Yeah, okay. All right, I'm gonna stop talking. I'm gonna turn it over to Maeve to introduce our featured speakers.
All right, hi everyone. I'm really excited for this month's guest speakers. So I'll introduce Levi McKercher is a PhD candidate in the biology department at the University of South Carolina. Co-presenting with Levi is Clare Escamilla. She is a PhD candidate at Clemson University in the plant science and
environmental science, I believe.
yes department. They have been collaborating on research that Levi is going to tell you all about. So really glad to have you here and
Awesome, thank you. All right. And Claire and I are proof that Clemson and USC can get along.
It's possible.
Yeah.
You just
Might
yeah,
be.
sorry.
Thanks.
You just want to make sure the folks online can see it.
Sure.
I don't even know. You see it? There it is. Probably could have done it better than I could.
There's Claire.
Hi, Claire.
Hi.
Can we hear Claire okay? Claire, say something funny.
Oh, right on the the spot. I don't know what's a good joke.
Perfect. All right. That's good.
But I can see the slides, so
All right. Awesome. Well, first and foremost, thank you all so very much for having us here. It's exciting and inspiring being in a room with, like-minded folks who care about the environment. They care about conservation. So again, it's a privilege and thank you. So we're here to talk today about floating wetlands. From the start, what are floating wetlands? And then how they can potentially be used to provide multiple services in stormwater ponds, both here in South Carolina and potentially in the Southeast and abroad. Right. All right, like any good presentation, we'll start with some background. So it need not be said, but globally in the United States and especially in South Carolina, coastal development is occurring at extreme rates unseen like ever before. This includes previous habitats like old growth forests becoming highly altered urban developments, which have profound effects on both water quantity concerns as well as water quality concerns along the coast. So to deal with these water quantity and quality concerns that we have in our urban developments, by far and away, the most popular best management practice used is stormwater retention ponds. They're first and foremost used to provide flood prevention to keep the stormwater runoff from our roads, from our basements, from our businesses. However, they also are designed to provide some water quality improvement. They act as settling basins in which runoff comes in, is spread out, and the particles can settle out and therefore provide cleaner water in these ponds, which then is sent downstream into our natural waterways like intertidal creeks and natural rivers. These stormwater ponds may also provide some improved aesthetic. They may improve property values in some areas. And they also may provide valued habitat for both terrestrial and aquatic organisms that are found in urban developments. However, I have a question mark as I'll touch on how these stormwater ponds may not be able to provide some of these services in which we critically demand. So as I mentioned, stormwater retention ponds are very popular. This figure was produced by Eric Smith of the North Inlet Winyah Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve, which those stormwater reports that we grabbed this from are actually here if you want to copy. But these dots are stormwater retention ponds, or excuse me, are stormwater or ponds that are installed in the 8 coastal counties of South Carolina. They're colored based on non-developed ponds, which are green, and the red, which are those developed ponds. And in 2013, there were over 21,000 ponds representing 30,000 acres within the state, which is a large area, of which 43% or 9,200 of those were stormwater ponds, just in the coastal 8 counties of South Carolina. So there are tons of stormwater retention ponds, and these are often located in highly visible areas in which there's a lot of foot traffic. And this is also not just isolated to South Carolina. There's also a ton of stormwater ponds in other southeastern states. For example, in 2020, there were more than 76,000 in Florida, and that number is largely growing. So these stormwater ponds are popular and they're increasing in their usage. Now, an unknown subset of these stormwater ponds along the coast are tidally influenced, meaning they drain outward into our salt marshes, into our tidal creeks. They're designed so stormwater runoff is treated and flows downstream. However, because of tidal cycles, hurricane events, water backflows into these stormwater ponds, creating brackish conditions. And so here I'm showing 2 different ponds, which happen to be 2 of our 3 field sites we'll introduce in a bit. But this first pond is located very, very close to the natural salt marsh. And so it has a higher salinity of 20, on average, 20 parts per thousand, which is roughly 2/3 that of seawater. However, when we get a big rainstorm event, you can see the salinity in red drop dramatically. And so you can imagine if you're an aquatic organism, perhaps a more saltwater fish that's in this pond, That's a big change, and you need to be adapted to survive that. However, we get another tidal cycle, it rises a bit, and then the tide comes back in again, and the salinity rises right back up. However, we have our second case pond, which is buffered by another stormwater pond. It's quite popular to construct them in series in these urban developments. However, that has a little bit lower salinity, hanging around 12 or so. And this is over the same time period, over a month in July, and that same rainstorm didn't change the salinity a whole lot. And so the point I'm trying to make here is, one, these ponds can be brackish, and two, even though they may be located close together, they behave differently from a water quality perspective. And now, the potentially bad with stormwater retention ponds. So there are some serious water quality concerns. These stormwater ponds are not natural to the landscape. And so they are designed to receive runoff, which might be rich in nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen from yard fertilizers or perhaps pet waste, which stimulate nuisance algal blooms, as is shown here. Some of these algal blooms can be harmful or toxic, which therefore threatens natural wildlife like fishes, as well as pets, and in some instances, human health as well. Other concerns common with stormwater retention ponds are very high temperatures because they're very shallow, which then again further supports nuisance algal blooms. There can be low dissolved oxygen concentrations resulting in fish kills as well. And so these stormwater ponds are super popular. However, oftentimes this is the case if they're not managed properly. Often then, either physical, chemical, or biological strategies are used to improve the quality of these stormwater ponds such that they can function better and they're not quite as much of an eyesore as is this pond here. And one such biological method for providing some ecosystem services that we demand in stormwater retention ponds is the use of floating wetlands. Now, floating wetlands go by a multitude of different names: floating treatment wetlands, constructed floating wetlands, vegetated islands, vegetated wetlands. Essentially, they're all describing the same thing, which is this structure, which is constructed by placing aquatic or wetland native plants in some sort of a buoyant structure or mat, shown here, such that the plant roots hang down into the water column and the plant shoots, leaves, and potentially flowers are exposed to the atmosphere where they can get sunlight for growth. Now, floating wetlands really were introduced in the literature around 20 years ago, or the early 2000s, and they were first used for water quality improvement, where these plants, the roots hang down in the water column, and like all plants, they need nutrients to survive. And so they take up that nitrogen, that phosphorus that's in excess in a lot of stormwater ponds, grow, and thereby improving the water quality of these ponds. These floating wetlands may also facilitate microbial denitrification, which converts nitrate to nitrogen gas, which is found in the atmosphere, which is just another potential nitrogen removal pathway. So floating wetlands were, again, first used for water quality improvement. However, as more were being applied and used, people were starting to think that they might be able to provide other potential ecosystem services in these urban settings. One of which that I'll be talking about a bit later is potential habitat for both aquatic and terrestrial organisms, as well as a significant amount of community engagement, where folks can come and help install these floating wetlands and gain some aesthetic value, which is really, really neat. And so that brings us to our research aims, and the first time that I'll tap in my partner, Claire.
Yeah, thanks, Levi. So, Levi kind of set the background and talked about, some of these potential benefits that we see in floating wetlands. And there has been research that shows those water quality benefits, but most of that has been in freshwater ponds. So those have been a little bit more well-researched in your freshwater environments. But where there's still a big question mark are those brackish environments. So what Levi was talking about, where that tidally influenced and that those changes in salinity that we might see in these ponds. And that's kind of where the start of this project started, where there were actually instances, the town of Mount Pleasant or other communities where they were trying to install floating wetlands along the coast, and using plants that we know have worked in the upstate or in other freshwater ponds. And unfortunately, when they installed them, the plants died because they couldn't handle the changes in salinity. So it kind of showed that, these are unique systems and they're going to need specific plants, and we just need a little bit more research to see if they kind of act the same way that they do in freshwater systems and are what type of benefits they're providing, some of those supplemental benefits. So that's kind of where Levi and I's research comes in. So I was looking more on the plant side, so figuring out which plants are most suitable for using in these floating wetlands that can survive these brackish conditions. And then also, as Levi kind of showed on that map earlier, where we saw those developed stormwater ponds, the majority of those are in residential subdivisions. Most of the time, those are governed by homeowners and HOAs. So they are, what goes in and around the pond is kind of at the mercy of the people in those communities. And they have a lot of ideas of how they like to use their ponds and what they want to see. So in order to be successful and to hopefully have our research go from research to actual implementation, we wanted to make sure we understood what these residents preferred about their ponds and their perceptions of floating wetlands to see if there were any potential barriers and if that was something we could address as we were going through our research.
Yeah, and then the third large research aim is to quantify the habitat value for terrestrial and aquatic organisms in these floating wetlands, which are installed in those brackish stormwater ponds. So largely habitat value of floating wetlands has been assumed. If you look at some of these commercial suppliers, they'll show lots of pictures. However, there's not a whole lot of science that backs that. And so we really wanted to get out in the field and really measure these communities and gain some sort of understanding of if these are good habitats, bad habitats.
So kind of where my project started was in the greenhouse, where I was really just trying to understand which plants that we could use in these. So I was screening a range of plants over varying salinities to see how well they do. And then from there, kind of taking the plants that perform the best and use them in field floating wetlands to then see them on a larger scale. And then throughout that, because we know that these are highly visible ponds, there's lots of community members involved and who have opinions, we wanted to make sure we were engaging with the community throughout the project. So early on, I held some focus groups as well as distributed some surveys to local coastal residents to learn about their perceptions on floating wetlands, but as well, just throughout the project, we've had different events. This is some of our installs where we invited community members out to learn more about floating wetlands and what they are, just to help gain more support for the project. So a little bit more about the greenhouse trial. So I screened 13 different plants, and there's obviously, this is not the full list of plants that are going to do well in brackish environments, but just kind of trying to give a starting point. So I was really looking for plants that were native to South Carolina and to the southeastern region, ones that were wetland plants, so they could handle that constantly wet root system, and then ones that we could kind of find readily available in most nurseries. So it wasn't going to be a really obscure plant that we would recommend and then people would have a really hard time actually finding to be able to use in their ponds. We wanted something that would be easy for people to be able to get in the future. And then again, kind of knowing that these are visible ponds, we wanted to try to include some design. So I did also try to include some flowering plants to see if we could find some flowering plants that would do well in these brackish systems too, just to add a little pop of color. And so what I found as I kind of went through the 8 weeks, I looked at them through a range of salinities. So kind of low salinity where it was freshwater or around 0.5 parts per thousand. And then I did 5-10, which is kind of like a medium salinity, and then up to high salinity, which was 18. And then I also tried to do some increasing salinity trials as well as random, where I would change the salinity every week just to see how they could handle some variation. As kind of Levi showed, sometimes the salinity in these ponds can change pretty quickly. And what I found is, unfortunately, most of the flowering plants did really well in the lower salinities, but really couldn't survive in some of those higher salinities. So this is one of them, Canna flaccida. You can see kind of freshwater 0.5, nice, good, healthy roots. Overall looking pretty well, but then as we kind of get to those higher salinities, really not doing well and not very healthy roots. So really couldn't survive in those higher salinities. And then there were some of the plants that then could handle kind of tolerate those moderate levels of salinity. So could kind of go up to your 5 to 10 parts per thousand, but then couldn't handle that higher salinity. So this is Bacopa monieri, water hyssop. So treatment 4, that's our highest salinity, that's 18. So you can see it was growing pretty well through most of the salinities, but really didn't grow much in that fourth salinity, and that was kind of the same for Uniola, which is your sea oats, Kotzelettskia virginica, as well as your Phyla nodiflora, which is frog fruit. And then finally, we had kind of our plants that can survive a wide range of salinity. So these are ones that performed well in your lower, your medium, and your high levels of salinity. We really didn't see any change depending on what salinity there was. So you can see from these plants, that's, the 3 grasses that we screened. So those are going to do well in all of them, but we really lose a lot of our flowering plants and a lot of variety. So I was able to find 2, the Solidago sempervirens, so your seaside goldenrod, and then the Baricia frutescens, your sea oxide daisy. Both were able to survive those higher salinities. Unfortunately, they're both yellow. I would have loved to have one additional color, but I was really excited just to find at least one flowering plant that we could put in these higher salinity ponds. And so kind of just to sum it up, big picture here is, if you have a pond that is mostly in the lower salinities where you're not seeing a lot of, you're not too close to the marsh where you're getting a lot of high salinity tides, then you have a bigger option. Not as much as freshwater, but you've got a lot of options that you can pick with. But then as your salinity goes up in your ponds, you're going to have to be more selective about which plants you put in which ponds, because they're not going to survive if you pick something that isn't going to survive those salinities. So you really kind of have to let salinity guide your plant selection when it comes to these brackish ponds. So it's something that you definitely need to monitor that salinity, and then more than just taking the salinity once, as you can see, there is a lot of fluctuation. So taking it, several different times throughout the year, even, throughout different tidal cycles or after large storm events, just to see what that range is, and then picking your plants kind of based on that highest salinity that you see, just to make sure that your plant's not going to die once you install it. So from there, we then moved to our field sites, and while we would have liked to kind of use all of the plants in our field sites, especially the ones that only do well in like the lower salinities, the salinities in these ponds, we couldn't really test those. So we just used a smaller subset. So our 3 sites, we had Kearns Park, which was our highest salinity pond. Typically the salinities were above 10 parts per thousand. Then we had Old Village Landing, which is kind of our medium salinity. So it's usually somewhere around 10. And then Lake Bend Tatum, which was our lower salinity, which was typically lower than 10 parts per thousand. So with that high salinity pond, again, there wasn't a lot of options. So we did include, one flowering plant, but kind of kept it with the grasses so that we knew that it was going to survive those different salinity levels. And then with both the medium and our low salinity ponds, we chose the same plants, mostly because even though Lake Bend Tatum was our low salinity, every once in a while it would still kind of get up close to that 10. So just to make sure that we didn't put something in that wasn't going to survive, we kind of wanted to make sure that those plants could handle at least up to 10. So we still kind of included our 2 Spartina grasses, but then also included a couple of flowering plants too for a little more color. And so it's always a big jump kind of going from the greenhouse into, the field where things are a lot more unpredictable. So it was definitely a little stressful right after installing, kind of seeing if these plants were actually going to survive, if what I saw in the greenhouse was going to, transfer over. And, the Kearns Park where we had that highest salinity, that was definitely one that had me nervous. But, this is the first 9 months of after we installed it, and you can kind of see how quickly it started to grow and take. So it was really exciting to see that it did well. We were also able to capture kind of, every month, and then leading to the winter months. So the Spirabolus virginicus, the lower lying grass kind of up front, that one does brown over the winter, but the 2 Spartinas as well as the Baricia stay green. So we always get a lot of questions on what these look like in the colder months when things are not actively growing. So now we have some photos that we can just show, and then people can kind of select for maybe plants that stay greener through the winter or not, depending on what they prefer. And then for Lake Bend Tatum, this was our freshest pond. So again, it was, exciting to see kind of, again, within those first couple months, really starting to grow, especially kind of having that Bacopa monieri, that kind of creeper plant up at the front, really was able to cover the mat. So we didn't see that really bright blue. It had a much more natural look. And then, starting in July, you can see the crinum lilies, the white lilies blooming. And then by kind of August, September, you've got the Kotzelettskia, the mallows that have the pink flowers blooming. So it was really great to see those working as we wanted to. As this kind of being the fresher pond, there's also a lot of wildlife here. So there are always ducks and turtles on the wetlands. And it seemed to also potentially the ducks or other things could be bringing in a lot of other volunteer species. So we also saw this pond that was the freshest have a lot more volunteer species. So started to get a little bit more weedy looking, I guess might be a word for it, but still, a very healthy floating wetland, but a lot more than what we originally planted. And then finally, Old Village Landing, so that one that's kind of right there in the middle. Again, all the plants were doing really well kind of throughout that almost kind of first year. It was really interesting here because the flowering plants didn't really take off as much the first year, so that kind of allowed the two Spartina grasses to really grow. And actually, it was interesting, the Bacopa monieri, that creeper plant kind of started growing out and making the mat even bigger. And then as that started to expand, then the Spartina patens started to grow out too. So this wetland's actually getting bigger than what we originally even installed, just as it kept kind of growing out. And it's been really cool to see. So that kind of leads us to, this was just a month before the end of our project where we did our big harvest at the end. So this is kind of them in their full glory, definitely looking pretty lush. And yeah, just kind of really interesting to see how different they've kind of grown and developed. I feel like with the higher salinity pond in Kearns Park, it still looks, I think, very well manicured. Nothing really grew too big or kind of out of control. Also, I mean, you have pretty mowed banks. There's not a lot of vegetation around, but we didn't see any volunteers coming on that, as opposed to like our fresh pond, Lake Ben Tatum, where we see a lot there. We saw a willow tree end up on there and some cattail. So it's been interesting to see what's colonized the wetland there. And then our Old Village Landing, which has kind of become mostly grasses, but I think still looks really cool. And so then that kind of leads to the design consideration. So when I was talking in our focus groups and online survey with residents, knowing that it became pretty obvious very quickly that these ponds are highly visible. People take their kids out to maybe feed the ducks, which is not the best thing, but to at least view it, and then just kind of enjoy the wetland there, enjoy the pond there. So we knew that anything we put in the wetland, in the pond, was going to have to enhance that overall aesthetic value. But of course, what people find attractive varies greatly. So I had different designs of floating wetlands, and I would ask them, what people like and what they don't like about each photo. And from there, we were able to pull some overall common themes that kind of helped guide us on maybe what would be important for designing a floating wetland in these highly visible public places. So definitely, they didn't like a monoculture. They didn't want just one plant. They wanted some texture, some variety of color, and some variety of height. A lot of times, because you can see with those foam mats, I mean, the one we had was very bright blue, so it looks pretty artificial looking, and people did not like seeing that mat. So having some of those low-lying plants that could cover it and provide a more natural look was something that they preferred. They didn't want to see that foam mat. Because they love going out there and seeing wildlife and something to help with pollinators, they really wanted a floating wetland that was going to be able to bring more of that and to help provide good habitat for those pollinators and wildlife in that area. And so that's where some of the research that Levi's going to talk about is so interesting, so we can see how they're using that floating wetland. And then again, a lot of these people really didn't love to see, dead plant material in the pond. So, while these ponds can just naturalize and have a very wild look, it did seem like there might be a little bit more maintenance that we would need to do, especially kind of in the winter when some plants do die back, just to kind of keep it looking a little bit nicer than some on how floating wetlands could normally look. And so this was something we did pretty early on. So we did try to incorporate those design those design preferences into our 3 floating wetlands. So, you know, where we could in those lower and medium salinities, having that low-lying plant to cover the mat. We tried to do a variety of plants for a variety of heights, and then again, where we could, including that pop of color. So including some of those flowering plants. And, you know, generally from people who would stop and talk to us while we were out in the field, you know, people seem to really like the look of them. We've had people tell us that, you know, gators have been lying on one. We definitely see, you know, ducks enjoying it, or nesting on it, which I think Levi will touch on. So it seemed like, you know, kind of having some of those design ideas early on and incorporating them, you know, anecdotally seem to have some success, and people seem to enjoy and like the wetland. And so, you know, a lot of times I think in gardening, we think about the right plant for the right place. And so for these brackish ponds, I kind of see that in 2 ways. So one would be, you know, the right plant for the salinity of your pond, but then also with the design, as you know, design preferences in mind, also thinking about the right place to put the plant even on the mat. So this is something that I've been working on, and I hope to kind of release. We're going to be doing a floating wetland guidebook here at the end of this project, where we just kind of list out the plants and talk about the different, you know, what salinity it can go up to, but then also when you choose the plant, you know, where you might want to put it on the mat, if it's going to be an edge plant, a middle plant, or a center plant, kind of based on how tall it grows, so that, you know, it does have a nice look to it. And it's hopefully going to give homeowners, community members a good place to start, where they'll be like, okay, well, I have a medium salinity pond. I'm going to choose one edge plant, one middle plant, one center plant, and then that's where I'm going to start. And then hopefully that will, you know, help guide people in the right direction for these floating wetlands.
Awesome. Thank you, Claire. And now I will transition into some of the work that I've been doing over the past couple of years. So just a reminder here, these are our 3 ponds located in Mount Pleasant, just across the way from Charleston, South Carolina. These ponds, again, are differ in salinity, which is a direct function of their distance from the natural salt marsh. The ponds that are closer to the salt marsh are higher salinity and more tidally influenced. These are the floating wetlands that we installed. They each represented 3% of the surface area of the ponds. That's a question we take a lot, is how big to size these? Well, it depends on the budget. You don't want to go too big. But for this, we were consistent at 3%, but generally 2 to 5 is common. And just to echo again, we used a variety of flowering plant species, as well as some of those that are often more observed in the natural salt marsh in monoculture. And so I think this just kind of hits on a theme with the floating wetlands that, you know, using those plants that you're observing in nature is likely going to be the best bet for these applications. And so jumping to some of the work that I did, I was looking to characterize flying insect communities inhabiting these floating wetlands. And so to do this, I use sticky trap deployments, which you all might be familiar, those yellow cards that really catch pesky insects above your sink. Well, these are scientific versions with grids, about 5 by 7 in size. And so we did 6 week-long deployments in from July through August in 2023. We positioned these sticky traps in triplicates, 3 of each, both on the floating wetlands as well as on the shoreline habitat, which is a bit of a tricky nuance because, as you can see, at least at Kearns Park site here, there really wasn't much habitat at all along the shoreline, which is a common theme. We've heard them referred to sometimes as golf course ponds in these residential areas. But anyway, so we would deploy these sticky traps, wait a week, go back, collect them, and then identify all of the insects to order, or in some cases suborder. And so I really want to give props to an undergrad, Danny Como, who spent a lot of time and used her expertise helping there. So she was a saint. So that was for the flying insect communities. We also, during our monthly field samplings over the course of 2 years, conducted systematic visual surveys where we would walk around the ponds and note all of the animals and organisms that we were seeing, taking photos where we could. And then also deployed trail cameras as well to pick up any animals that were interacting with the floating wetlands themselves. And so jumping right into the results. So here I'm showing those communities of insects and spiders, which are technically not insects, that interacted with the floating wetlands themselves. And so across all of the floating wetlands for the 6-week-long deployments, we collected over 7,600 insects and combination of insects and spiders across 10 orders. And so here I am showing that abundance or number of insects and spiders collected, where these communities on these floating wetlands were largely dominated by diptera, which are flies, and thrips, which if you've been in coastal South Carolina during the summer, that's probably not surprising. However, we were also interested to find other potentially more beneficial organisms, pollinators, such as our Lepidoptera, butterflies and moths, odonates, dragonflies and damselflies, spiders as well, making webs on these floating wetlands with the emergent vegetation. So it was really, really cool to see how the communities broke down. We even saw some Orthoptera, which are our grasshoppers, which is sort of curious how they got to these floating structures. It really is magnificent. And now I'll compare those sticky traps deployed on the floating wetlands against the shoreline. And so I was a bit curious. We found a far greater number of beetles on Coleoptera on the floating wetlands as compared to those shorelines. The abundance of butterflies and moths were similar between the floating wetlands and the shoreline. However, we found a far greater number of damselflies, which are Zygoptera, on the floating wetlands, which when we thought about it actually makes a lot of sense. So damselflies require emergent vegetation to oviposit or lay their eggs. They actually lay their eggs in the stems of plants. So if there's no plants present on the shoreline or nearby, then they're not going to reproduce. So that was pretty cool. And we also saw just a slight greater number of dragonflies and spiders on these floating wetlands as well, indicating that these floating wetlands may provide at least additional habitat or in some cases novel habitat in these stormwater retention ponds. So I mentioned we also observed these floating wetlands both above and below the mat structure, and we were pretty excited to find oysters and barnacles and scorched mussels on that rigid mat structure. Which makes sense as oysters do need some sort of hard structure to recruit. But this was cool for multiple reasons. First, these are filter feeders, and so they are passively improving or actively improving water quality. And they're also bioindicators, indicating that the stormwater pond water quality might not be so bad after all. Also, as Claire highlighted before, we did see a variety of vertebrates interacting with these floating wetlands throughout our study period. So starting at the top, we very commonly saw pond sliders hanging out on the edge. They actually, at the beginning, kind of tore up some of the Bacopa plants, which is really interesting. They also used it as a restroom, I suppose. So there's a lot of feces on top of the mat, which was quite interesting. I caught on the middle photo a great blue heron that was from a trail cam, which was pretty exciting. And throughout the study period, we'd see them foraging for fishes and other aquatic animals off the side, which is cool. And Claire also mentioned we very frequently saw mallard ducks, which very commonly inhabit these stormwater ponds. And we were surprised and somewhat startled to come across a nest. That's actually a photo of the nest that we found in the floating wetland. Of course, we didn't touch it or interfere with it. They're federally protected, but this is not the first nest that we saw. And so this really shows that these floating wetlands, might provide some really important structure and cover. Just having a conversation earlier that some mallard ducks in a different pond were having some trouble reproducing. And so, these floating wetlands might be a potentially viable option if that is your goal. However, like all stories, there are the good and the bad. And so I want to present the honest story that throughout this period, we did observe some examples of these floating wetlands behaving as traps for various organisms. We found some mullet. If you all are familiar with, estuarine fishes, they're always jumping out of the water. Well, they jumped out of these ponds and onto the mat where they become trapped. Same with our grass shrimp, white shrimp, just snap up and become trapped. And then the worst of all, we did encounter the turtle in one of the planting cups that didn't have a plant. And so humbly, it was a tough sight, but we did learn. And now we encourage those that use these type of floating wetland designs to make sure they're planted, and you're unlikely to see that. So again, just hinting at, The floating wetlands, contemporary floating wetlands are often made from plastics. There's a few suppliers, and I'm not here to discredit them. However, I think as scientists, engineers, pond management professionals, we can be better and, explore other materials options, designs, Coming back to those turtles, we'd often see them on the edge, but as you all maybe saw, the bigger plants grew outward. Well, we stopped seeing turtles because they can't climb onto the floating mat anymore because the vegetation was protruding outward. And so, potentially we have a floating wetland with an attached basking area that isn't planted, some of these ideas that we can think about just to improve the habitat if that is our goal. Some folks might want to use these floating wetlands only for water quality improvement or in wastewater lagoons, where they can select one plant species that's a workhorse for nutrient removal. But in that case, they wouldn't want animals in those ponds or on those floating wetlands. So that classic, it depends. However, I think these floating wetlands are promising, just so long as, we're applying them in the right context with the right plants, the right materials. All right, so with all of that, we'll just jump towards our major takeaways. And the first being that these stormwater ponds may provide additional services. They are designed to prevent flooding and provide water and quality improvement. However, the classic statement, if you build it, they will come, often applies with these stormwater retention ponds. Fish are entering them through culverts, especially in tidally connected systems. Insects are buzzing around the edges. Pollinators are recruiting when there's flowering vegetation. So, keeping that in mind and trying not to create traps that these animals recruit to and end up dying or experiencing reduced fitness. Same story with the floating wetlands. They might provide habitat. We know they often do provide water quality improvement. However, if they're going to provide habitat, avoiding those traps that we may unintendedly create, but we can learn from our experiences and be better. And I think Claire will touch on the last bullet point for us here.
Yeah. And so I think, Levi was kind of already alluding to that on the last slide that, these floating wetlands have the potential to provide several different benefits, but that doesn't mean that one wetland can do all the benefits like to the maximum. So we do kind of need to think about what the overall goal is for that specific pond. And then, there are definitely different plants or designs that's going to work better for depending on what that overall goal is. And that might mean that then you might not have as much water quality improvement, or maybe it might not be as ideal aesthetically if you're trying to do one or the other. So you kind of need to find some middle ground. So, some of the design stuff that I touched on, I think works for a lot of these stormwater ponds where, we are in these privately owned communities where, aesthetics is really important because they see those ponds as an amenity in their community. But you might lose a little bit of some of the water quality benefits. So, I think there's strength in numbers. So I think, by maybe finding this middle ground, we're able to have more wetlands and more ponds. And so, we'll see more cumulative benefits than if we just focus on what's going to give us the best water quality, but then nobody wants to put it in their pond or vice versa. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting results that Levi and I are going to take from it. And then we want to put it all into this guidebook. So if y'all are interested in floating wetlands and kind of learning more and kind of figuring out what the goals are for your community, hopefully we'll be able to provide some recommendations so that they can be successful.
Awesome. And of course, we'd love to acknowledge our funding sources. So South Carolina Sea Grant Consortium, USGS, and South Carolina Water Resource Center have been our main funding source, and great project partners. Slocum Lund's Foundation for funding each of our graduate studies. Town of Mount Pleasant for helping us select the ponds and really facilitating this research. And Clemson Extension, who houses Clare, and the Brook Marine Field Lab, and the University of South Carolina, which houses my studies. And so with that, I would be very excited, as would Claire, to take any of your all's questions and hear what you think. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Measure like sediment on the bottom of the pond, and what is the general ratio of water to sediment? I mean, sediment would grow over time, right?
Sure.
So
Yeah. So Claire, the question was about pond sedimentation, how often we measure it, and kind of how that behaves essentially.
Yeah.
So for this project, we did a sediment bathymetric survey, basically at 3-meter transects along the pond gridded, measured the sediment depth. And so it is important because as these ponds receive more and more suspended solids, they fill in, which reduces the water volume, which then produces more runoff. So it is critically important. As for this project, we're less concerned about, like, it's not as much focused on the water quality portion. I would say these ponds are generally supposed to be about 1 meter deep, so 3 to 5 feet deep. For these ponds, this average sediment is like about yay. So I should mention these ponds were constructed in early 2000, so they're about 20 years old. And I would say that they're getting to the point where they need to be dredged. So that is also another concern, is as they fill in, dredging is expensive. If there are, macroinvertebrates in developed communities of organisms in that, the dredging is going to, wipe them away essentially.
Deeper wetlands don't work as well.
Yeah, so as far as water quality improvement goes, neither Claire nor I are here to say that they're like miracle workers, going to drastically change, a pond, especially at a percent like 3%. And so that's where, these other benefits might add to the value of a floating wetland. I also studied floating wetlands during my master's, and we called them sort of like a Band-Aid. So, it's not a great solution, but it can provide some help in the meantime. So yeah, sedimentation is a major issue. And then it becomes, who's going to pay for it? Who's going to manage it? So yeah. And I will say, because we've also sampled some of the, the sediment for the benthic macroinvertebrates, and it's a strong sulfur smell. So there's a lot of sediment, and it's some funky stuff, anoxic for sure. So yeah, another question.
Good job, guys.
Thank you.
That was fantastic. And please tell the guy that I guess counted all the bugs.
Yeah.
Good job too.
Yeah.
So I have a question about clarity. Did you notice at all the watercolor changing? Did it become more clear? Did it not? Did it change colors? Can you
Yeah.
share a little bit about that?
Yes. So we have a question, Claire, about water clarity and turbidity. And so when we go out monthly, we do measure water turbidity. And the short answer is no. We didn't see any like drastic improvements for multiple reasons. One, these are tidally influenced, and so they flush in and out, especially that really shallow nearest salt marsh pond that flushes daily. And so you visit and, the water level is really low, as is in this picture. That's actually that site. And then you can see where the bank becomes grass. That's the amount of fluctuation of water. So in short, no. There's been quite a few mesocosm studies that do show that, at a smaller scale, they can definitely take up nutrients, provide water clarity improvement, but on a field scale, not necessarily. And so that's, again, water quality benefits may be somewhat limited. So yeah. Thank you. Yep. All right, we have 3 questions, Claire.
Ooh.
The platform, or is it free floating around the?
Yep. So the question was about anchoring system, Claire. I can just tackle some of these and then I'll tap, if that's okay. So yeah, I didn't mention that they are anchored. Yep. And so we want them anchored such that there is some slack. And so that way, as the tide rises or wind forces come, they don't, break the rope off. From my master's project, we saw heavy winds can topple the floating wetlands over with just one anchor point. And so contemporary designs include 1 or more lines to prevent that from happening. But yeah, yes, anchoring is encouraged. This is a little bit past that, but thinking about, potential end of life for some non-plastic alternatives, we're working on developing biodegradable options that may not float as long. Like plastic floats well. I think we all know that. But if the floating wetland, perhaps if the rope breaks or it becomes detached or it just starts to sink, it may float over to the banks. And if it is, natural bamboo or some of the wooden materials, even if it sinks or becomes detached, it can sink and potentially provide fish habitat, or in some cases with some smaller experimental designs, we've seen them actually ingrain into the bank and become like shoreline or riparian vegetation. So we didn't necessarily touch on like end of life stuff with floating wetlands, but if people want to switch the plant design or remove plants, they might be able to plant them elsewhere as shoreline, buffers, or use it as fertilizer. However, in some applications where there are contaminants of emerging concern, or, pesticides or other applications like that, we would not suggest, repurposing the plants where you might, burn or ash them. Yeah. Okay, others? Yeah.
Because I was concerned about longevity, how
Yep.
long does plastic last for? Is
Sure.
there issues with them sinking over time if you don't remove vegetation, or if heavy animals get on top of it?
Sure.
Is it PVC underneath that's giving it flotation?
Okay, yeah. So Claire, we've got questions about materials, plastic degradation, and buoyancy, basically. So for this one, and I'm realizing I should have brought an example mat. So that's my apologies. This is basically like it's synthetic plastic that reminds me a lot of like those mats that you put down so kids don't hurt their knees and fall on. So like those puzzle piece mats, essentially. So it's pretty light. And then they have holes in which you put potting cups, which you can put your plants in directly. So this one is not PVC. There is some PVC here, which is what we use to install them. But there are like, these are bee mats. So they're probably one of the lead providers, I would say globally, and for sure in the United States. But yeah, they're quite buoyant. As far as like how long these floating wetlands last, there isn't enough research to really know. I mean, I think it varies depending on the pond and the climate and plant species.
Yeah, I've seen
But-
some estimates like with the foam mats can last like up to 10 years. But yeah, I think there's a lot of variability.
Yeah, I would say like 5 to 10, 5 to 8, depending. What I will say to answer your question about heavy plants, so we have performed destructive harvests at the end of the season, basically to collect the plants and weigh them, some of the data that Claire was presenting. And so we needed to collect plants from the middle of these islands. Well, that means we have to get to the middle somehow. And so what we did is we separated the sections, and that was hard. Like these plants are robust. Like they are sturdy. We always joked like Claire was going to walk over these. And I think some of these mats would actually support human weight. So they are sturdy. I don't think there's any indication that these will be sinking anytime soon, and they are mature. So yeah.
I think we gotta keep moving just for the sake of time, but I think Levi.
Yeah, and I'll stick around, to answer questions. And yeah, this has been great.
Yeah. So huge thank you again to Levi and Claire.
Cool. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Claire.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Oh, thank you all. Cool. I'm gonna stick around, so I would love to take any more questions as you'll have.
I think you know what time it is. Well, Levi, you don't, but everyone else. And we really, really need a theme song, don't we? Someone agree with me?
Yeah, we needed a theme song.
Okay, great.
As people more aware.
I have to give credit where credit is due. That is the chorus of an AI generated song that was created by a Low Country chapter member, Brian Fuchsen. He's a really, he's a character, and he's great. And he has converted his entire lawn to native plants, despite his HOA's issues with it. But he made this song, and I immediately was like, I need to steal that for Plant of the Month. So I decided Plant of the Month should be Mycania scandens, commonly known as climbing hempweed, hempvine, or climbing boneset. It is in bloom right now, and I was out taking a walk and saw a massive patch of it, and that was how I got my inspiration. It is in the Asteraceae, so it's in the aster family. Mycania is actually this is one of those instances where it's named after someone. So I believe his name was Joseph McKercher, and he was a botanist professor in Prague in the late 1700s and into the early 1800s. So the genus is named after him, and scandens just means climbing or vining. So to describe that this plant is a vining plant. They tend to be more rambling over like lower shrubs and vegetation as opposed to like going far up into the trees. They will get lengths of 5 to 20 feet, but they kind of twine in and of themselves. So it creates more of like a mat as opposed to, you know, a longer vine. They'll grow in sort of part shade to full sun conditions. They usually grow at the edges of forests in damp places. So they tolerate poorly drained soils like clay-based soils. So these are great for those wetter spots in your yard. This is the distribution. It's fairly common, as you can see, in the coastal plain, which is represented by the white. And then a little bit up into the Piedmont, and gets a little bit rarer when you go up in the mountains. There is a second species, Mycania cordifolia. It is a lot less common. It's much more rare, so you don't see that one nearly as much. These are the flowers. They're very small, but if you zoom way in, I think that they're really adorable. I love these like kind of squirrely corkscrew filaments or anthers that they have. They're just really beautiful. They're also fragrant. They have this, I mean, fragrance is subjective, but I sort of liken it to like a light vanilla honey smell. That's how I discovered this the first time, maybe a year or so ago. I was walking by a patch that I wasn't even noticing, but I noticed the smell first. And then I was like, where is that coming from? Yeah, so these are just really, and they're in clusters, so they're pretty showy. These are the leaves. They're sort of cordate at the base, which just means heart-shaped. That's this section here, cordate, and then they taper to a point at the end. And then they also have these these deep lateral veins that's sort of a telling sign of the leaves of this species. These are the seeds. They are achenes, just like every other plant in the aster family, but they have these pappus or hair-like filaments on them, so they're wind distributed, kind of like milkweed seeds are. The seeds require about 8 weeks or 60 days of cold, moist stratification to germinate. And they are a pollinator favorite for sure. As you can see, they will move that out of the way. They will attract moths and butterflies. They will attract bees. That's a carpenter bee there in that photo. And they will attract wasps among many, many other kinds of pollinators. So they really are very beneficial that way. And that's it. Plant of the month. Any questions?
How do you know it's not the invasive? I just found one like earlier this week growing in my sweet potatoes, and the deer like potatoes, so there was the hemp vine. But I understand that there is an invasive alien.
In the same genus? I'm not aware of it,
Okay.
so I can't answer that question.
No, the flowers on mine, maybe they're not open yet, don't look like.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, these are really close up too. But yeah, I don't think, yeah. I don't know, I have to do more research.
Okay.
Anybody else? Okay. We move on to upcoming events.
There's a lot of them.
Buckle your seatbelt.
All right, let's get her out of here. Okay, we have a field trip tomorrow. Who's going? Awesome. Babs, you're in charge? All right, y'all do what she says. And you're gonna meet, for those of you who are carpooling, you're gonna meet here in the parking lot, park by the trees, in the morning. Say hi to me once you, no, you don't have to, okay.
Can I just add, if
yeah.
anyone decides they want to go tomorrow, please contact me and I'll get you the details for it. So just come talk to me or email Grand Strand Education at SCNPS.org.
Yeah, there's still room. Okay, and then on Saturday, I hope Saturday is busy. So one of your first stops, you can go to the Brookgreen Gardens Fall Plant Sale. Does anyone want to chime in from over there? I hear there's gonna be plants.
Get there early, it's very popular, so gates open up at 9:30, and that's gonna be your best selection. Bring your own cart if you have it, because those carts go fast. And then our Native Plant Society is gonna be there along with the master gardeners and horticulture staff to answer your questions.
Woo!
Pawpaw trees.
Ooh.
They're pretty big too. They're like $30, but they're like 5-gallon, like this tall, like they're pretty good size. All right.
No.
They're early.
Get there early for pawpaw trees. All right. Yeah, and stop by the our table, the SCNPS table. Okay, so after you go early to Brookgreen, and you get your plants, you can also join the autumn equinox at the Waccamaw Tribal Grounds. This takes you to the QR codes for Facebook, for the Facebook event. Sudi will be leading some plant walks there at 10 and 2, but I also know they have some other events going on throughout the day. So, you know, Brookgreen, then autumn equinox. Oh, and that's all you have to do for Saturday. I thought there was more. Okay. And then, am I missing something?
Beach sweep
There's-
Saturday.
There's a beach sweep on Saturday as well. So yeah, make sure, pencil this all in. And then for those of you who joined us for our green drinks event last month, a couple weeks ago, we heard a little bit from Trapper and Coastal Conservation League, talking about their campaign against the Ride 4 ballot measure. So if you want to learn more about that, you can join them for a postcard writing, or visit their website for more information. If anyone wanted to recall a better recap, essentially, I'll pretend to be Trapper for a second. What did we say? There's some good projects on the Ride 4, but unfortunately there was a lot of bad projects that would carve through conservation lands and things that we're not excited about. For the specifics, talk to someone more knowledgeable than me. And then, because you won't get enough plants at the Brookgreen Garden sale, or maybe you will, I don't know. If they're all sold out, you can go to October 5th, the Moore Farms Botanical Garden sale, and remember, their proceeds from this sale benefits our grant program. And those our first grant cycle for fall just closed. We got a handful of applications, and your grant committee members will be reviewing those soon, and we'll be excited to announce our winners. But that was funded by the Moore Farms, their plant sale. So go there and buy some more plants and then help fund more grant projects in the future. Okay, and then after you're done there, we have 2 volunteer opportunities for you. So first, October 5th, I don't remember which is which.
So October 5th is going to be at Myrtle Beach State Park, and October 26th is at Huntington Beach State Park.
Okay, so Myrtle Beach State Park first, Huntington second. And you can sign up for those in our newsletter, and they're online on the calendar now, right, too? Cool. And then once you're done volunteering, you can also see Maeve at what is it? Wild Birds Unlimited. You're gonna give a little talk there?
I am.
Yeah. So you can check her talk at 11 on Saturday, October 5th. Whew. Yeah. Huh. Right?
Pulling out of the state park.
Yeah.
We're going to where.
So, yeah, this talk had to be rescheduled, so it
Oh,
it
sorry.
corresponds with the Moore Farms plant sale and the Myrtle Beach State Park invasive species removal. So if you can be in 3 places at once, please join us. Otherwise, I hope I will see you at the talk or well, I'm gonna go to the invasive removal and then leave and go to my talk.
So Maeve's gonna be really tired. So cool. All right. Oh, and then this, I don't know if y'all heard about this. Our Grand Strand native plant sale is Saturday, October 12th. Tanya, do you have anything to add?
Yep, we have 6 vendors, including a new vendor to us who will be bringing local eco-type seeds to sell. So that will be really cool. We will have the state parks will be there, and we'll have some state park rangers and activities. Yeah, and if you're a member, you get in early at 8:30, so you should sign up if you have not signed up already. You can sign up the day of the event though, too. And we may or may not have a free plant giveaway if you sign up that day.
Stocking on way.
Yes, it'll be at the town green, sorry. The town green has been under construction, but is green again. So we will be there. We will be not square.
That's right. Okay. And then jumping ahead to November, this is the next time we'll see you in person here for our chapter meeting, where some of you will be presenting on a topic you're passionate about, and many of you will bring snacks to snack on for our potluck. Please. And do we have any member updates from the crowd? Does anyone have any events they want to share? Or? Okay.
I'll be giving a talk on coastal native orchids to the garden club, the Georgetown Garden Club.
Oh, great.
On October 9th at 10:30 at the library. In Georgia. Yeah.
So that'll be in our next newsletter. Okay. So if there's no more updates from the crowd, remember, this is your homework. Plant sale flyers. We have some to distribute. They were somewhere.
I think I put them on the sign-in table.
Okay. Yeah. So grab them on your way out. Hang them up somewhere. We want you to stop recycling, and we want you to sign up for member presentations in November. I think that's all. Okay. If you have any questions for Levi, he's still here. And I think Claire might be here. Maybe not. You're welcome to ask. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you all online.
I wonder who's gonna want to carpool here.
Sure. There is. Yeah, this is really cool recording. One of the chapters, stormwater bonding ecology, and essentially that we really don't know a lot of what's going on in these ponds.